Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Caesar's Palace for 12 rounds of boxing. In the red corner, from Los Angeles, California, wearing the red trunks with the gold trim, weighing in at 125 pounds, the lightweight champion of the world, Danny Little Red Lopez. Well, Bill, our winners get a home theater receiver. That's right. Experience the full potential of high-definition video with this 72-channel digital home theater receiver from Yamaha. But wait, that's not all. They also get a 5.1-channel surround sound system from Mirage. With 5 palm-sized speakers and a compact subwoofer cube, the MX 5.1 brings you huge immersive sound with Mirage's omnipolar technology. All from the Spiegel catalog, Chicago, Illinois, 60609. And they're taking closer order as down the stretch they come. Mr. Hot Stuff has 3 lengths to make up with Chocolate Candy last. On the rail, take the points behind that gallant son with Chocolate Candy gaining on the outside. In the lead is Pioneer of the Nile being tackled by Chocolate Candy. They're neck and neck as they come to the wire. And Pioneer of the Nile holds off Chocolate Candy and wins the Santa Anita Derby. And now, on your feet, time to greet holder of 14 NBA titles, your home team, your Los Angeles Lakers. Number 3 at 6'8", 5th year out of UCLA, playing forward, Trevor Ariza. Starting at center, number 17 at 7 feet, 4th year out of St. Andrews High School, Andrew Bynum. And at guard, number 24, 6'6", 13th season out of Loyal Marion High School, Kobe Bryant.
I've been on the David Letterman show 7 times, which is amazing, but I'm still not famous for being on that fucking show. That's the depressing part. Like, I could be on a TV show and I could be the mystery celebrity and they wouldn't have to hide me. But that's my favorite introduction. You may have seen this next comedian on the David Letterman show, but I believe more people have seen me at the store. And that would be a better introduction. You may have seen this next comedian at the store. And people would say, hell yes, I have. He likes cereal.
Good morning. It's Wednesday, Apollo Wednesday, October the 22nd, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Varney and Company, motivation, meditation, and Apollo. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. The end of Maria and the beginning of Varney.
I mean, we know that COVID, there hasn't been the proper recovery from COVID in terms of the margins of a lot of these companies. And also, Disney has gotten a lot of flack for pivoting wholly to the luxury market, right? Mm-hmm. I'm from Southern California. Going to Disneyland, especially if you lived in the area, was supposed to be something that a middle-class family could afford to do every once in a while. Still not cheap, but something that was within the realm of middle-class family could do it. Mm-hmm. They can't do it anymore. There is a great avenue here for Six Flags to be known as the national brand that is just as fun, but not incinerating all of its money on the streaming and on the woke and on the luxury for the
They lost $319 million in the first half of 2025, to be clear. Travis Kelce said on Instagram, he said, I'm a lifelong Six Flags fan. I grew up going to these parks with my family, my friends. To help make Six Flags special for the next generation, I could not pass up this opportunity.
I can just imagine him
I
can imagine him just putting his hands up on a roller coaster ride, having fun.
Yeah.
Again, looking forward to seeing the advertisements. But I will say, Travis, watch out for my Steeler fans, or my Steelers over there. Aaron Rodgers, I'm pretty happy with the results, except for Cincinnati last week. I'm excited to see what happens.
Who saw Aaron Rodgers coming this year? That was not on my bingo card.
I called it from the beginning. My father said you're an idiot, Luke, but I was right.
Aaron retired. He's still going. All right, we've got just a little about 30 minutes to go before the opening bell. Real quick, Tiana, final thought.
Trump brought down that deficit 4%. I think 4% is the number. Bring down the deficit 4%. You have the 10-year below 4%. That's the whole ball game. That's how you keep interest costs low in the national debt, and that's how you bring down mortgages.
This is good news.
Yep. Inflation, growth, liquidity, all looking good. Things we pay attention to every single morning. I think buy the dip mentality is still here.
Luke Lloyd, Tiana Lodesher, thanks, guys. Varney and Company is up right now. Stuart, good morning.
Good morning, Cheryl, and good morning, everyone. Vice President Vance put to rest any doubts that the Gaza ceasefire will hold. He went to Israel, met with Netanyahu, and said clearly to Hamas, don't stray from the Trump deal. Hamas will be disarmed. And if they don't behave, they will be, as the president says, dealt with. Jared Kushner was also over there, and he said there would be no reconstruction funds for any part of Gaza that Hamas still controls. That's it. To the markets. Another high for the Dow Tuesday. Minor sell-off this morning. The Dow's actually up another 6 points. S&P up 5. NASDAQ down 33. Not much change at this point. But look at Netflix. Record ad sales. Best quarter ever. But the company had unexpected expenses from a tax change in Brazil. And that derailed the stock. It is down $95 a share this morning. That would be 7.8%. Bitcoin, I say it's languishing. You're down to $108,000 per coin right now. Gold way off its high. The high was well over $4,400 an ounce. Right now we're at $4,062. Silver down about 10% from its high. You're looking at $47 an ounce for silver right now. Interest rates are down. The 10-year Treasury 3.97%, edging up a fraction, but still below 4%. The 2-year 3.47. On the show today, an ICE raid in Manhattan. Agents crowded through the streets, arresting the people selling counterfeit products. There are many of them in New York, but as soon as ICE arrived, protesters showed up, some pushing and shoving, a dozen arrests. The alarm bells are ringing as Zoran Mandami holds his double-digit lead in the New York mayor's race. In the New York Times, an op-ed that reads, "Why Mamdani frightens Jews like me." In the Wall Street Journal, a Mandami mayoralty threatens New York Jews. In a Fox poll, 38% of Jewish voters support Mamdani. There's less than 2 weeks to the vote, not much time to change minds. The top 3 candidates debate tonight. And the president leaves for South Korea to talk trade and meet China's leader. Expect a few positive statements. Trump wants a strong stock market to go into the midterms next year. Now, the value of all stocks has risen an amazing $6 trillion just since Inauguration Day. The president doesn't want anything to upset anyone's 401k. Wednesday, October 22nd, 2025.
And that was the end of Maria and the beginning of Varney and Company. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of law and order, an example of determinism in action.
Yeah?
I don't want my baby to grow up without a father. I don't want Fernando going away forever. You have to promise me that he won't.
Ms. Galvez, I'm sorry about your situation, but The only way you can help your boyfriend now is to keep Uncle Sam from shoving a needle into his arm.
You don't understand. It's my fault. I made him promise to get me a car so that I could take my mother to work at night in Brooklyn. He has his pride. He wanted to take care of me.
He told you he was planning to steal the car?
Only after, when it was on the news. He was so sick about it. That's why he didn't shoot her. That's why he covered her up. He's not evil. He did it for me because I wanted a car.
There you go. So again, this is what they're saying is that the root cause of this crime, which was a murder, is her desire to have a car. Okay, and so therefore that makes him he's an innocent person because of this, and it's bullshit. He killed the woman because he's a killer, and that's what killers do. But this is throughout our society. Everybody loves determinism because everybody thinks, well, I can operate with impunity. I can do whatever the hell I want to, and if anybody challenges me, I'll just say it was the system that did it. And that if you want things to change, you want things to get better, you're going to have to change the system. It's Marxist and wrong. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a short clip from Bill Maher.
Harris would be the first woman president, first black woman president, and first Asian president. But I don't vote for who will be the first. I vote for who will win. And for whatever reason, Harris has never been popular. You can count the number of delegates she won in the 2020 primaries on one hand, as long as that hand has no fingers. In 3 years as vice president, she's been quieter than an electric car. It's not fair that she's not popular. She's intelligent and accomplished, and in fact was put in charge of the border. And look at how... Okay, bad example. So Bill...
And that was Bill Maher. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little bit of motivation.
What do you do when it seems like suffering won't stop? What do you do when it feels like your pain doesn't have a point? What does it do when it feels like your weaknesses continue to worsen? You're going through a tough time. Maybe you are in a valley today that you've experienced the worst failure of your life and you are on the verge of giving up. Maybe you're here today and your marriage is on the rocks. Maybe you're here today and you're dealing with anxiety on a daily basis.
You know what it's like to be in a lonely, dark place. You know what it's like to want to quit. You know what it's like when the pressure's overwhelming, when people expect your best, but you're at your worst.
That is a moment of choice. That is a moment of decision.
What will your response be? Are you going to sit back or are you going to step up? Adversity creates the perfect moment for audacity.
The real challenge of growth, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, comes when you get knocked down.
Life's going to punch you right in the face. Life's going to fire you over and over again. You're going to be told you're not good enough. Your faith is going to be tested. Your family's going to look you in the eye and say, how do we get health insurance the next month? I don't know, but I know we're going to make it. Life is hard, man. That's what it's about. If you don't work as hard as you can, if you don't sacrifice everything, if you don't get rejected and keep coming back for more, if you don't get your loyalty tested and your faith tested, you don't love that thing if you bail out. So if you fought through all that, that's love.
Even in the darkest times, even when the sun is blotted out and the world is falling apart, the darkness cannot extinguish your light, your will. No matter what is happening, no matter how hard the fight is, as long as you keep fighting, you win. Only surrender is defeat. Only quitting is the end.
Listen to me, everybody. You can't give up. You can't give in. If it was easy, everybody would do it. But if life's got you down, I need you to get up and prove them wrong. I'm unstoppable. This will not get me down. You've got to make those kind of declarations to yourself. I
have never met anybody who became incredibly successful in any area of their life until they had suffered and sweated and sacrificed and kept their focus and fought through tears and trials and tests. And if you have a dream and you commit to it, it will come to pass.
You must have patience and engage in consistent action. We live in a world, ladies and gentlemen, where people want instant gratification. They want it right now. No, it's simple, but it's not easy. It's a system that if you work the system, it works if you work it. But make no mistake about it, it's hard. And you are the determining factor. The people that make it in this world look around for the circumstances that they want, and if they can't find them, they create them. It's you that you must take personal responsibility to make it happen. It's hard. No, easy is not an option. However, ladies and gentlemen, what you will discover is it's worth it.
Now listen to me. I don't care if you're sick. I don't care what you're going through. If you're not dead, he ain't through with you yet. As long as you waking up, you still in the game. As long as you alive, you can still make it happen. As long as there's breath in your nostrils, boo, you still in the game. You still can win. Now get your butt up. And it's the size of the fight in the dog. I ain't smart. I ain't never got all A's. But I got hearts. I got will. And I go take everything I want. And can't nobody stop me. Bring on the fight. And I'll match your intensity. I will match your fight. And you will not outlast me. What will you do with your pain? Will you let it break you? Or will you let it redefine you?
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you, and now a little bit of meditation. And that's a little bit of meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little short one from Dr. Berg.
How can I reverse my biological age?
Nitric oxide is one of the most important compounds in preserving cardiovascular health. Most people die of heart problems. As we age, this nitric oxide can decrease up to 74%, putting our heart at risk for not only high blood pressure, but inflammation inside your arteries. Here are the top foods that will help you increase nitric oxide. Number 1, beet juice. Number 2, arugula. Number 3, garlic. Number 4, dark chocolate. Number 5, citrus. 6 is pomegranate seeds. 7 are fermented foods like sauerkraut and kimchi. Just make sure that you never use mouthwash, because mouthwash will stop the bacteria from helping you make this nitric oxide.
And that was a little bit of Dr. Berg. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now an article from the American thinker called Witkoff and Kushner Blew It on 60 Minutes.
Witkoff and Kushner blew it on 60 Minutes. Just when Republicans are winning, they go and shoot themselves in the foot, giving away vital political gains to liberals. We are literally the gift that keeps giving. Enter Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, architects of the potential peace deal whereby Hamas finally released Israeli hostages after over 2 years of brutal captivity. Spiking the football, the two ventured into the belly of the beast by giving an interview to Leslie Stahl of 60 Minutes. That alone is a rookie mistake by rookies playing statesmen and politicos. Not only are Stahl, 60 Minutes, and CBS compromised, their audience is chock full of liberals holding viewpoints that do not support or favor Israel. Certainly not in the aftermath of October 7th. Image created using AI. The excerpt CBS released before going on air Sunday included both Witkoff, dare I say witless, and Kushner discussing their reaction to Israel's September 9th attack in Doha against Hamas leaders. The duo characterized Israel as out of control and having nearly jeopardized the entire deal process. In discussing their surprise about Israel's missile strike against Hamas leaders living in and getting protection from Qatar, Witkoff stated, "You know, I think both Jared and I felt. I just feel we felt a little bit betrayed." Responding to Stahl's comment that Trump was furious, Kushner offered, "I think President Trump, felt like the Israelis were getting a little bit out of control in what they were doing, and that it was time to be very strong and stop them from doing things that he felt were not in their long-term interests." Their comments feed the sickening narrative in the Arab world and among leftists in the U.S., Israel, and Europe that Israel's post-October 7th response, including neutralizing Hezbollah, Iran, the Houthis, and Hamas, was disproportionate, out of control, and a genocide against the Palestinians despite painstaking Israeli efforts before any attack to get Gazan civilians to safety and provide them with humanitarian aid. Their comments fail to recognize that, under international law, Israel had a right to ensure safety to its people from Hamas terrorists paragliding, tunneling, and riding bikes into Israel, intending to massacre and capture innocents. Their comments place responsibility for jeopardizing the peace process squarely in Israeli hands, even though there was literally no traction for peace on the Arab world's part up until the Doha attack. Their comments perpetuate the misguided belief that, while the October 7th massacre was wrong and bad, and, yes, it would be nice if the hostages could be released, but Bibi was preventing that for his personal political gain. Israel had lost the public relations war and had completely lost the moral high ground, as if Israel has ever been on the winning side of the public relations war. The politically astute response from Witkoff and Kushner should have been yes. The attack in Doha on September 9th had the potential to upend negotiations, but Netanyahu apologized, refrained from further incursions against Hamas leaders living in Qatar, and this catapulted the negotiations to a speedy and positive conclusion. This would not have been a bending of the knee to Israel's detractors, but would have been truthful, would have addressed the issue directly, and would not have provided Israel's critics with additional ammunition. in response to Stahl's breathless remark that Netanyahu, the Israelis, bombed the peacemakers, bombed the negotiating team. Witkoff added that this had a metastasizing effect because the Qataris were critical to the negotiation, as were the Egyptians and the Turks. And we had lost the confidence of the Qataris. And so, Hamas went underground, and it was very, very difficult to get to them. Witkoff's claim that this single act drove Hamas underground belies reality. Any difficulty in finding Hamas troops in Gaza and rooting them out was not something that materialized after the Doha incident. They had been underground since October 8th. Moreover, it was after the Doha scare that the Qatari leadership realized that they were not untouchable and that the long arm of the Israeli military was capable of inflicting grave harm in Qatar. This Israeli strategy worked in Lebanon with Hezbollah, in Iran, and, to a lesser extent, in Yemen with the Houthis. It is more likely that the Israeli attack, maybe even inadvertently, prompted the Arab parties to get on board with a Trump deal before Israel turned its attention to Arab states harboring Hamas terrorists. Not too long ago, in the beginning of September, the Qataris were hardly good-faith negotiating partners. Instead of peace, they gave aid, comfort, resources, and protection to the Hamas masterminds behind the unspeakable atrocities of October 7th. Very little was accomplished in terms of releasing the remaining hostages. Frankly, none of the Arab parties had come together before September 9th and taken a strong stand against Hamas while making a strong push for peace. That came only after the Qataris realized that Israel had its sights set on Hamas in Qatar. Moreover, getting any of the hostages back before September 9th had been a painstaking process that lasted almost 2 full years, with little traction in the months leading up to the September 9th Doha attack. At the beginning of September, any hope of releasing the remaining hostages, dead or alive, seemed to be all but extinguished. Efforts to negotiate their release, not peace, but their release, came in fits and starts with no real results. But once pictures of an emaciated Eviatar David digging his own grave emerged, and Israel attacked Hamas leaders in Doha, suddenly the Arab world wanted not only to release the remaining hostages, but also to have a go at the brass ring, peace. It had been 2 years, but this was accomplished in roughly a month. As far as I am concerned, Witkoff and Kushner threw Israel under the bus before the ink was dry on a peace deal that so far is not peaceful. It was an unforced error they did not have to make at a time of teeming anti-Israel sentiment and virulent anti-Semitism that is coming from former allies of the Jewish state in both the left and the right in Europe and the U.S.
And that was the article, Witkoff and Kushner blew it on 60 Minutes. The only thing that the author didn't do is explain why, and that's because the administration has a business bias. They're full of business people, and so they think that business principles and ideas work everywhere at all times to accomplish whatever it is that you want. And they're going to find out, and are finding out on the world stage, that not everybody, again, wants luxury hotels and golf courses. Some people are more interested in power. Putin and most of the folks in the Arab world, for instance. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, what does the phrase, if you're explaining you're losing, mean in debates? This was said by Ronald Reagan, speaking of political campaigns. From the perspective of your audience, if you have to explain yourself, you come off looking desperate to convince. As a consequence, you lose the high ground. From a more philosophical perspective, when you have a clear conscience and strong conviction towards the positions you take, your values, truth, and direction, you don't need the opinions or consent of others. As a consequence, you don't need to explain yourself. However, if you yourself are not convinced of the validity and truth of your position, or you can't fully justify your choices, then you continue to expel words in an attempt to create the illusion of certainty. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a little bit of law and order.
Your Honor, the statute is crystal clear. A person must cause the death of another person. Mr. Driscoll was the cause of his own death. The only role that my client played was that of a journalist conveying a fact to an interview subject.
What he conveyed was an erroneous report, knowing the devastating impact that it would have. That report is what caused Mr. Driscoll to take his life.
Say whatever you want about the report. My client's hand wasn't on the syringe.
Well, that's a hair-thin definition of causation. People v. Duffy.
The Court of Appeals upheld the manslaughter conviction of a man who gave a gun to his distraught friend. The court ruled that the defendant may be convicted for engaging in reckless conduct that results in another person's suicide.
Your Honor, I'm asking you to weigh this one fact-checking error against my client's lifelong commitment to journalistic excellence.
And I would ask, Your Honor, to weigh Mr. Driscoll's life against Mr. Nolan's craven pursuit of ratings. If he hadn't been in such a rush to televise a suicide, he might have checked his facts.
Amen to that, Mr. Cutter. The motion to dismiss is denied.
Okay, so there you go. This is clearly a case where the judge, and I know that this is, a fictional series and all that, but that the judge is deciding the motion based not on the law and the facts, put the law together with the facts to decide the motion. Instead, he's deciding it on who makes the better argument. The district or assistant district attorney got in the last word, and he made a very clever argument, and so the judge is persuaded. That's wrong. It should be, again, make it based on the law and the facts. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now from a book that's called Good Inside. What's the opposite of understanding? For this argument's sake, it's convincing. Convincing is the attempt to prove a singular reality, to prove that only one thing is true. Convincing is an attempt to be right, and as a result make the other person wrong. It rests on the assumption that there's only one correct viewpoint. And then my question is this supposed to be convincing? Further, Convincing has one goal in mind, being right. And here's the unfortunate consequence of being right. The other person feels unseen and unheard, at which point most people become infuriated and combative because it feels as if the other person does not accept your realness or worth. Feeling unseen and unheard makes connection impossible. Understanding two things are true and convincing one thing is true are diametrically opposed ways of approaching other people, so a powerful first step in any interaction is to notice which mode you're in. When you're in one thing is true mode, you're judgmental of and reactive to someone else's experience because it feels like an assault on your own truth. As a result, you will seek to prove your own point of view, which in turn makes the other person defensive because they need to uphold the realness of their experience. In one thing is true mode, exchanges escalate quickly. Each person thinks they're arguing about the content of the conversation when in fact they're trying to defend that they are a real, worthy person with a real, truthful experience. And again, is this convincing? Back in a minute. Thank you. Now an article from Yahoo News. Largest protest in U.S. history, embarrassingly irrelevant. And see, I'm not a king at all. Quote unquote. Donald Trump could be forgiven for being baffled at the No Kings protests that took place across America over the weekend. A sequel to the first and equally feckless demonstrations held in June, they involved what the organizers claimed to have been 7 million Americans, potentially making them the largest protests in American history. Appearing to skew boomer or above in age, they faintly recalled the anti-Vietnam War protests that some participants might very well have attended 6 decades ago. But unlike those popular, persistent, and issue-focused events, only a few days after No Kings, hardly anyone seems to remember or care that they happened at all. For all the participants' bile and determination, the event unfolded as a vulgar, cranky carnival of disgruntled old people holding signs with saucy slogans, dressing up in bizarre costumes, and carrying the occasional American flag upside down, a traditional indication of distress. No Kings has no obvious leaders, no coherent political program or action plan, no clearly defined next steps, and not even a hint of another date for a third such demonstration. Apart from a disdain for Trump and personal endorsements by some Democrat leaders, it has no discernible ideology, no community, and little else that could define it as a movement. Even the No Kings branding suffers from a fatal flaw in logic, for if America truly had a powerful authoritarian ruler, then surely his subjects would, as any anti-Putin Russian citizen could readily assure us, not have the freedom to protest against him en masse within steps of his home. Yet that's exactly what happened, with multiple city police forces announcing that no arrests were made in a country that indisputably has, under Trump, the world's strongest protections of free speech and expression. Indeed, some participants who gave videoed interviews appeared to have difficulty defining what a king is, while others were hard-pressed to state precisely any reasons why they oppose Trump. Meanwhile, the news cycle swiftly moved on. On Sunday, Bolivia's elections ended nearly 20 years of leftist rule in a final vote between two strongly pro-American candidates. On Monday, Trump received Anthony Albanese, the Australian Prime Minister, at the White House, where they signed a joint agreement to develop a multi-billion-dollar critical mineral and rare earth element enterprise that will challenge Chinese global market domination. Tuesday saw U.S. stocks hit all-time highs on the strength of strong corporate earnings reports, while a Reuters poll revealed that Trump's approval rating increased over the weekend from 40 to 42 points. And in what No Kings protesters may well have taken as an especially strong rebuke, a federal judge ruled that Trump's controversial deployment of National Guard troops to Portland, Oregon is legal and can continue. Perhaps we will see the protesters again, but their wheels are spinning in a world that has no regard for them. And that was an article called "The Largest Protest in U.S. History Was Embarrassingly Irrelevant" by Paul DeCanoy. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a short TV commercial. TV commercials very much reflect our culture and its values.
Help reduce plastic landfill waste with San Francisco Bay Coffee's commercially compostable 1-cup coffee pods. That's one small sip for a better tomorrow.
So there you go. The whole environmental movement is based on the idea that all property is owned jointly, that there's no such thing as individual property rights, which is absolutely wrong. We know that. And that's what this commercial is about. It's saying, hey, whatever it is that you use to put into your coffee is my business. No, it isn't. Whatever I purchase belongs to me, and I get to decide what to do with it and how to dispose of it. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little bit of Donald Trump.
The American dream isn't a handout or a hashtag. It's a porch light left on, a flag out front. It's what you earn through hard work and what you're free to build when your leaders put you first. I've never forgotten that. From day one, I fought for the American worker. To protect our homes, our families, we built a strong economy so every American can turn dreams into something truly their own. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, keepers of the American dream.
And God bless America and God bless Donald Trump. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Georgia Meloni.
Insomma, continua l'azione decisa dell'Italia nel contrasto all'immigrazione illegale di massa. I risultati stanno arrivando e una volta che avremo finalmente creato un quadro di norme europee efficaci, siamo certi che quei risultati saranno ancora migliori. E a beneficiarne saranno soprattutto i quartieri periferici delle nostre città, le fasce più deboli della nostra popolazione, le nostre autorità di pubblica sicurezza che non vedranno più frustrati i loro sforzi e gli stranieri irregolari che scelgono di integrarsi nella nostra società. Ma più in generale ne beneficeranno tutti gli italiani, anche quelli che non sono d'accordo con il nostro approccio. Lo avevamo promesso e lo stiamo facendo. Lo avevamo promesso e lo stiamo facendo e continueremo a farlo, perché la storia recente ci ha dimostrato che non importa quante menzogne si raccontino, né di quali nefandezze ti si accusi, né quanto si tenti di metterti i bastoni tra le ruote, la maggioranza degli italiani, sempre più maggioranza, riconosce il lavoro serio, la buona fede e i risultati. E finché quella maggioranza sarà dalla nostra parte, noi andremo avanti con la testa alta e lo sguardo fiero, consapevoli della grande nazione che rappresentiamo in Italia e all'estero, perché sempre più italiani possano essere fieri di noi e soprattutto orgogliosi di essere italiani. Vi ringrazio.
And that was Georgia Meloni. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Apollo.
3. With the manned missions coming at the rate of one every 2 or 3 months, it was not feasible for a flight controller to work every mission. Each mission had 3 flight directors, with a 4th available to fill in occasional gaps. One flight director was designated the lead flight director for each mission, responsible for its overall supervision. The mission everyone wanted to work was, of course, G. And within the G mission, the shift everyone wanted to work was the lunar descent. Cliff Charlesworth was the lead flight director for the G mission. He did not hesitate in picking the flight director for the lunar descent. It had to be Kranz. Kranz had been flight on Apollo 5, the first unmanned test of the LEM. He had worked the LEM maneuvers on Apollo 9, the first manned test of the LEM. No one else had nearly the experience with the lunar module that Kranz had, plus something else. Gene was the guy you wanted on the headset when there was trouble, Charlesworth said later. When the term flight controller is used, the first person I think of is Kranz. That decision made, Charlesworth asked himself who had the most experience with rendezvous. The answer was Lunny. So Lunny got the lunar ascent. That left the launch phase and the lunar surface activities for Charlesworth. Milt Windler, one of the 3 newest flight directors, would round out the team. The experience with the LEM that Kranz's white team brought to the G mission from 9 and 10 was limited to the LEM systems and how the machine flew. Accomplishing the actual landing posed new problems. The flight profile from Apollo 10's 47,000 feet on down was tricky even if nothing went wrong. The first key point was PDI, Powered Descent Initiation, when the crew had to fire the lunar module's descent propulsion engine, DIPS. After that moment, the command module was useless as a rescue vehicle. If something did go wrong, no matter what the failure might be, the astronauts would have to use the LEM to get back up again for a rendezvous. During the first part of the burn, the descent engine pushed forward against the LEM's momentum to slow the orbiting spacecraft, keeping the LEM in a legs-forward position almost parallel to the moon's surface. During this phase, the crew would be able to look down at the lunar surface, but they would not be able to see where they were going. At about 4 minutes into the burn, the LEM would rotate so that the critical radar systems would now be looking down, acquiring the data that would guide the spacecraft to its planned landing site. At approximately 6.5 minutes into the burn, the crew would throttle DIPS back to about 55% power. At 8 minutes, now only 7,500 feet from the surface, the LEM would pitch forward so that it came nearly to the vertical, enabling the crew to see out their windows toward the landing site. Then it would be time for the landing itself. The LEM was designed to fly like a helicopter with a rocket engine instead of a rotor. Like a helicopter, the LEM was not easy to fly. On the ground, the crew had 3 different ways to practice. One was in the simulators at MSC and the Cape, which didn't fly but could rotate and tilt and show lunar views out their windows. The second was an ingeniously constructed tower facility at Langley, where the crew could practice the final 70 feet of the descent in a simulator suspended from the top of the tower in such a way as to duplicate 1/6 Earth gravity. Finally, there was the Flying Bedstead, a free-flying machine that had given everyone scares for the last year. First, Armstrong and then another test pilot had been forced to bail out when the machine crashed. It had been grounded for many months, and only because Armstrong insisted was he permitted to resume using it for practice in the spring of 1969. To some degree, design faults made the Flying Bedstead liable to crash, but there was more to it than that. A machine that truly mimicked the task of flying a lunar module was going to be hard to fly. Lunar descent was a complicated procedure, and there wasn't much time to practice. From the first Apollo flight through Apollo 11, the people building the simulators were caught behind the curve. The flight hardware was always at least a little behind schedule, and it was always being changed. The simulators couldn't be built to mimic the real LEM until they knew how the real LEM operated. Then, after the simulation hardware was built, there remained the even more difficult task of writing software that would permit the sim soups in the control center to put the crews and flight controllers through their paces with realistic multiple-branch scenarios. In the case of the lunar descent, the simulation software wasn't completed until about 2 months before G's scheduled launch. But that was okay. The white team was coming off Apollo 9 with what we thought was a pretty hot hand, Kranz recalled, and they were ready. 2 months was plenty for the white team. The first simulation of a landing on the moon on May 29th was a major event within MSC. The viewing room was filled with senior NASA officials. Lowe, Gilruth, and Kraft were in the back row of the Mocher. It was not the real thing, but it was exciting nonetheless. That morning, after all the years of preparation, they were going to practice landing on the moon. Down in the trench at the Guido console sat Steve Bales. Bales, like most of the others in the front room, was, at age 26, a veteran in terms of experience. He had been in the flight dynamics branch for 5 years. Bostic, Bales's boss in the flight dynamics division, had watched him carefully over the last year, as had the flight directors. Steve Bales was still a kid in many ways, inclined to oversleep if you didn't get him on the phone and make sure he was in an upright, conscious position a few hours before his shift, given to enthusiasms and excitements. He was not the image of flight controller cool. He would sit at his console constantly twisting a lock of his hair at the back of his head so that it stuck out like a small pigtail. But Bales was also a crackerjack guido, quick, reliable, and knowledgeable, and now Bostic had picked him as guido for the G mission, along with Jay Green for Fido and Chuck Dietrich for Retro. Controllers wanted the first descent shift just as badly as astronauts wanted the mission with the first landing, some of them almost obsessively. It took at least one Fido a long time to recover from being passed over in favor of Green. It is indicative of the spirit shared by the FOD managers, and managers in Apollo in general, that the men who could have assigned themselves to the descent phase, Charlesworth, Bostic, did not do so, just as Kranz, as head of the Flight Control Division, could have assigned himself to be lead flight director for Apollo 11. During the descent, Guido's was an especially important console because so many of the things that could go wrong involved errors in guidance. On this first simulation of a descent, Bales was as nervous as he had ever been on a real mission. The first lunar descent sim, however, turned out to be routine. The sim soup didn't try any funny stuff at all. He just let the flight controllers and Armstrong and Aldrin determine that they could indeed put the LEM down in one piece if nothing went wrong. And so it went for the first few days of sims, shooting the nominals, they called it. Normal burns, no major malfunctions, no dispersed trajectories. But then the simulation team started putting the meat to us, Kranz said, and to put it bluntly, we started crashing. Or almost as bad, they aborted when they didn't really have to. Several novel difficulties made the descent simulations especially harrowing. The voice and data delay was hard to get used to. At the speed of light, it took 1.3 seconds for a transmission from the spacecraft to reach the Earth, and another 1.3 seconds for an answer to return. That added up to 2.6 seconds between the time that an astronaut in the lunar module reported a malfunction and his receiving the quickest possible response. The ways in which that 2.6 second delay could screw things up were legion, the white team found. The difficulty was compounded by the slow computers of the 1960s. The most critical data during the lunar descent involved navigational calculations based on complex radar data. Those calculations took time to perform, so that 4 or 5 seconds would elapse between the time the data reached Earth and the time the trench and its backrooms could see what was happening on their screens. Another problem was the dead man's zone, a label that official NASA didn't like at all and tried to discourage. But it was called the dead man zone for good reason. During a short period toward the end of the descent, the crew had no way of aborting if something went wrong. During that period, only about 10 seconds long, the combination of altitude, by now very low, and rate of descent, still fairly high, was such that even if the ascent engine fired immediately after an abort command, the lunar module would crash before the ascent engine could overcome the inertia of the descent. The theory of how to minimize crashes in the dead man zone had been worked out, but the white team found that it was exceedingly difficult to apply during the sims, especially with that 2.6 second delay, which kept astronauts and controllers from staying in sync. Then there was the difficulty with the pings, primary guidance and navigation system, pronounced pings because sometimes the acronym was informally spelled PNGS. In the descent, if the pings found that the trajectory was deviating from normal, it was supposed to keep balancing two competing desirable states of affairs, landing at the assigned target and landing softly. During the simulations, the pings, given a choice between the two, had an unnerving tendency to decide to get to the target come what may. On occasion, Kranz said, if you were far enough off in your navigation state, the pings would point the LEM directly at the target and try to approach it in pretty much the same fashion that you would fire a projectile. This made for an extremely hard landing, the kind that was euphemistically called dinging the spacecraft, less euphemistically known as a fatal crash. Over in Building 2, the people on the top floors began to get nervous. At that time, the flight director's loop and the air-to-ground loop were piped into the offices of senior management so they could listen to what went on in the Mocher. I'd get calls from Kraft or George Lowe into the phone behind the console, Krantz remembered, that'd say, "When are you guys going to get your act together? You've crashed another simulation. What's wrong over there? What's wrong with your team or your timing or your judgment or whatever it is?" Krantz began to think of the lunar descent as going into a cauldron. The late start for the G mission had meant that Bill Tyndall's 1,000-ring mission technique circus had been kept busy up until the last minute. The simulations kept bringing up new possibilities, which then had to be thrashed out. The instrumentation lab people from MIT, the people with the main guidance and software contracts, had been especially hard-pressed, since the descent and ascent depended on their new and still untested programs. The flight controllers would go to the meeting with straw man mission rules, ones they knew weren't good enough, but that would provide a starting point, and Tyndall would stand up there with his chalk, exclaiming and exhorting, and say, "Okay, MIT, what do you think of this one?" MIT would say they didn't have any data for making up their minds, and Tyndall would get the sim-soups racing against the schedule to crank a test of the rule into the next simulation to see what happened. Tyndall's final mission techniques meeting for Apollo 11 was just 1 week before liftoff. Sometime during that harried training cycle of 1969, no one knows exactly when, Sim-Soup Jay Honeycutt went to talk to the controllers in the flight dynamics back room. Jack Garman, a 24-year-old controller working there, smart as a whip, computer hotshot, happened to mention the computer alarms to Honeycutt. There were many such alarms in the computer software, each designated by a number. The alarms hadn't previously come to the Sim-Soup's attention because they weren't designed primarily for the controllers or the crew. Rather, they were debugging tools for the software engineers, and they were buried deep in the bowels of the onboard computer program, as Bill Tyndall recalled later. We had gone through years of working out how in the world to fly that mission in excruciating detail, every kind of failure condition, and never, ever did I even know those alarms existed. And this was Bill Tyndall, who was not only running mission techniques, but before that had been one of MSC's lead engineers on the onboard computer and guidance systems. Garmin and the others working the operating system software knew that the alarms existed, but they hadn't paid any attention to them. As Garmin put it, the problems that triggered the alarms were not problems that could reasonably happen during a mission. But there they were nonetheless, linked to the crew's onboard displays, which meant that an alarm during a flight would produce a flashing light on the display and an audible alarm as well, like the alarms involving engines or environmental systems. This was just the kind of thing that an enterprising sim-soup like Honeycutt was on the lookout for. A seemingly unrelated event occurred in June, about a month before launch, when the MIT people programming the lunar module's onboard computer sent a crew procedures change sheet down to flight crew operations. Nothing involving the Apollo missions, not a switch setting, not a number, not a time, could be changed without the documentation of a change sheet, plus formal approval by a change board. In this case, the change involved the mode switch for the rendezvous radar. The lunar module had two independent guidance systems for homing on the command module. One was the pings, which was used to bring the LEM back up to the command module from the lunar surface. The other system, AGS, Abort Guidance System, was for guiding an abort should one become necessary. The mode switch for the rendezvous radar used by pings had 4 settings: off, auto, manual, and slew. The crew had been instructed to set the switch to manual before beginning lunar descent. But now the MIT people had decided to have the rendezvous radar keep track of where the command module was during the descent so that it could take over and abort immediately if that ever became necessary. The crew procedures change sheet specified that before beginning the descent, the mode switch for the rendezvous radar should be set to auto instead. The associated changes in the software were loaded into the LEM's computer. Then, after further consideration, MIT decided that the alterations introduced too many new procedural considerations too close to the launch date. But the software changes had already been installed, and to go through the elaborate procedures required to change them back again would be time-consuming. Someone suggested that if they didn't want to use the rendezvous radar for this purpose after all, they should just withhold the radar data that the pings needed to do its abort calculations, thereby preventing it from tracking the CSM during the descent phase. It was a simple and apparently no-risk fix. 2 mistakes were made. First, no one realized that withholding the information didn't make the computer stop trying to read the rendezvous radar. All it did was give the computer the impossible task of trying to find a match for a meaningless angle whose sine was 0 and whose cosine was 0. And because computers do not know when tasks are impossible, they just keep trying to do what they have been told. The second mistake was in failing to send down another crew procedures change sheet canceling the previous instruction to set the rendezvous radar mode switch to auto. No one thought it was necessary because, or so they thought, the original change had been disabled. These 2 mistakes nearly caused the first lunar landing to fail. On July 5th, just 11 days before the launch, the White Team came to the end of its training for the lunar descent. The crew was to be deployed to the Cape the next day, and the July 5th sims would be their last. By this time, the raggedness was gone. The astronauts and the White Team weren't dinging limbs anymore, and they weren't aborting unnecessarily. Confidence was high. The Apollo 12 crew was in the simulator, a normal procedure on the last training sessions to let the prime crew watch another crew in action, and to give the controllers more work, prompting a crew that wasn't as experienced. Everybody was expecting an easy session. It was the custom for the sim soups to ease off on the controllers on the last day of integrated simulations, to throw them some nominal sims with just a few minor glitches. The theory was that crashing the last sims before launch would be bad for morale. On the next to last simulation of the day, the scenario included one of the computer alarms that Honeycutt had discovered. When the alarm went off, the controllers didn't know what to do with it. Steve Bales, sitting at the guidance console, saw it and didn't have a clue what was happening. The computer seemed to be saying, "I'm overloaded. I can't do all the work I'm supposed to be doing." If that was really true, then they had to abort, which is the call Bales made, at 10,000 feet, still mystified by the alarm. At the end of the day, Kranz called the trench together. The control center had no mission rules that covered these computer alarms, and Kranz directed them to find out what every one of the alarms was and how it should be dealt with. Time before launch was so short at this point that there was no time for a formal mission techniques meeting. It was a pain in the ass, many of them thought, because there were so many failure modes on a descent that were much more likely to happen. But they couldn't just leave the alarms dangling. Kranz's team got together with the MIT people and began to work through them. As they did, they discovered a troublesome pattern. A program alarm could be triggered by trivial problems that could be ignored altogether, or it could be triggered by problems that called for an immediate abort. How to decide which was which? It wasn't enough just to memorize what the program alarm numbers stood for, because even within a single number, the alarm might signify many different things. We wrote ourselves little rules, Garmin remembered, like, if this alarm happens and it only happens once, don't worry about it. If it happens repeatedly but other indicators are okay, don't worry about it. Then again, if some alarms happen even once, or if other alarms happen repeatedly and the other indicators are not okay, then they should get the hell out of there. Trying to hold this list of permutations in their heads, the guidance controllers went back to reviewing the many other more plausible problems they might encounter on the first lunar descent.
And that was Chapter 24, Section 3 of Apollo by Charles Murray and Catherine Bly Cox. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that abortion is power for men.